Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. Joining me is Michael Standaert, our lead reporter. Michael, this week we're talking about a story that was headlined, Minnesota Immigration Crackdowns Loom Large for Some North Dakotans. And this is a complex issue with a lot of different sides and facets to it, but I want to start out by talking about how the story came to us. How did you first get connected with this story?
So I started hearing about North Dakotans who live in Minnesota who had been kind of caught up in a lot of the issues with the immigration enforcement actions in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We started getting some emails from people and just hearing about how, some of those people were helping out immigrant families, whether they're American citizens who are afraid to go out, whether they're, green card holders who are afraid to go out, because some of these people are also being, caught up in this enforcement action. So I did speak with a couple of those people. They didn't really want to be on the record of being in Minnesota, but that led me to look at some of the people they were talking to were faith leaders both in Minnesota and in North Dakota, who either had congregations or individuals or people reach out to them to ask how they can help, how is our church addressing this? How should we be thinking about it? So that's kind of, that was the way into this story. And that led me to just asking around to different faith leaders and faith groups around the state to just check in to see, how are their people responding to this? And then also, were immigrants in their communities also in North Dakota afraid or concerned about the potential for these actions to filter into North Dakota. So that was kind of the starting point for that.
There's a lot that went into this, and there are some things that I want to talk about for our listeners, because one of the things that we do with this podcast is give a little bit of insight into the reporting process. So I want to talk about the reporting process, but I also want to talk about some of the specifics of this story because it is such a complex story. And so let's start out with looking a little bit deeper into the story, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the reporting. But to start off with, was there anything that surprised you to learn as you were talking with some of the people you were interviewing?
I think one thing that surprised me was just the level of concern about talking about these issues. I mean, I think a lot of these discussions are going on behind closed doors right now. Some of the groups have been having training, seminars, webinars, various meetings, but I hadn't really seen much of that vocally kind of in the public yet. So I think, one of the things that's been going on, and this is before the recent shooting this last weekend of Mr. Preddy, that I did the reporting. So I think people have just kind of been trying to gauge what's going on and how people are seeing this. They don't want to, some of these pastors and faith leaders don't want to rub their parts of their congregation the wrong way. But they also feel like they need to address this just because they think the values that they believe in are being kind of impinged, I guess would be the word. They several of them had mentioned that, they're accenting the teaching of, welcoming the stranger in some of their conversations with their congregations and how this should be kind of the lead focus of what they're trying to get across.
You brought up something that I want to highlight again. When we write our stories, when you write the stories, we send our stories out on Fridays normally to our newspaper partners, and then they are held until the following Tuesday. So this story specifically was sent out last Friday. This is the Friday before that latest shooting. So the shooting is not covered in the story. It's not mentioned in the story because the story was actually written the day before that even happened. And then it's released publicly. Our stories are released publicly then the following Tuesday. So there's a 3-4 day gap in between. And with this story, especially this whole situation with ICE in Minnesota, it changes hourly with what's going on, and new things are happening all the time. So that, as a reporter, had to have been a little bit difficult to write around, just because you knew this was a constantly changing story, situation. But with the people you're interviewing, there's kind of a broader message for them.
Yeah, and I think this, what we focused on with this story is a little bit more evergreen than following, kind of the updates of what's happening on a daily basis there. So we probably could have reached out and said, hey, maybe release this now over the weekend, but looking at it, I felt that it wasn't really necessary to do that. We're trying to give some of the smaller papers time to prepare the story and get it ready to go out on the Tuesday. So that's
Mhm.
kind of the reason for that. But yeah, things are changing very quickly there, and looking a lot of this reporting took place the whole week before finishing the story and then releasing it. So I think those sentiments still hold. I think the people that I spoke with for the story are looking at the bigger picture and the longer term focus. I mean, one thing they mentioned, and several people had mentioned this Palm Sunday path is what it's called. So they're going to have some rallies on Palm Sunday um, coming up, and there's one scheduled that's officially scheduled for Bismarck, and then there's another one in Fargo that I hear is pretty much official now. They're starting to announce it. So yeah, I think for them it's a longer term focus. How can we help these people who feel they're under threat? They feel like they can't go to their daycares, their schools, and things like this in Minnesota. And I think there's also some concern that some of these enforcement actions could spread to the Moorhead area and possibly into Fargo and Grand Forks as well. So I think these people are preparing for that. How do we react if it comes to their communities?
Yeah, and that was the next thing that I was going to ask you is if the people you spoke with are concerned about this coming over into Minnesota, or excuse me, into North Dakota more from Minnesota. And that, again, is something that could be shifting even now as we're hearing, that they may be pulling more people out of Minnesota. But are they concerned throughout our state here in North Dakota?
Yeah, I think more so in the larger cities. I mean, there's been some enforcement here as well, on a much smaller scale. I mean, there's not federal agents roaming the streets as we've seen in Minneapolis and in that area. So it's a little bit less. It's a little bit harder to see it here, but that's happened in some cases from what I understand.
Mhm. Looking at the reporting process, you mentioned earlier that some of the people you spoke to didn't want to go on record. And in a story like this, I completely understand why. This is, a scary situation for a lot of people in various ways. They could be facing being removed from the country, or they could just be facing, losing their family and friends because of a difference of opinions and that kind of thing. So it's hard for people to talk about. As a reporter, when you're reporting on such a difficult story, there are different types of sources. And, we talk about you and I and other reporters, we talk about going on background with somebody, or we have a source that is off the record. Can you explain for our listeners who don't have journalism backgrounds what those different terms mean and what those types of sources are?
Yeah, I mean, off the record, you would not really be able to even record it or keep notes on it, or that's my understanding of it. On background, you could keep notes and just have it as kind of knowledge. That's part of the reporting process anyway. You're talking to a lot of people that you might not even eventually quote, just for information. And for kind of a better understanding of the situation. So a few people I had spoken with in Minneapolis who have North Dakota roots, they were a little concerned about potentially being named and just uncomfortable with it. So I was fine with just talking with them, and they weren't quoted in the story. It's just more for my understanding of what the situation is on the ground there. And that's just helpful for my own reporting and also in talking with the people who are here in North Dakota who are connected with other faith groups in Minnesota and trying to assist them in some ways. So that's just part of the process of getting a better picture of what's going on that you're looking at.
And then for anonymous sources, we try not to use anonymous sources in our stories. Once in a while, I'm sure that it is necessary. And the point with an anonymous source is it's not anonymous to you, the reporter, and you have vetted this source and you know the source to be a reliable source. but is just a source who cannot safely use their name. Now, we didn't do that for this story, but just to further explain the reporting process. Would you say that that's right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And with it's funny kind of seeing this happen here because, 15, 20 years ago when I was working here, you didn't really see this happen as much, but it seems like it's happening more where people just don't want to be identified or go on record about something. And you wouldn't really do that with officials or people in some kind of government position, maybe on background, something like that. But, just regular citizens and people who may be harmed in some way, you have a bit more of an understanding that they would not want to talk about something. And that's definitely okay. I mean, for me, at least to listen to them and see what they have to say. You can tell if somebody's kind of spinning you or lying about something. So it's the more people you speak with on something, you can kind of get a better idea what's truly transpiring on the ground.
Yeah. And first, a story like this, an article like this, that it's a very complex issue, and again, changing very quickly. You looked at it from a different angle, though, and I really appreciated that because it's not something that we have been reading a lot about in other news, but it is something that is affecting North Dakotans. So as you're researching and really getting into a story like this that is so complex and has, brings up a lot of different emotions in people, is there any like guiding light that you hold to or anything that you really try to stick to as you're doing it?
I mean, just try to listen to people and let them tell the story is
Mhm.
kind of what I try to do. I mean, I did, the people that are quoted in the story are the ones who did want to speak openly about it. I did reach out to other faith leaders and groups in the state, maybe more prominent ones, and either just got a refusal or just didn't hear back.
Hmm.
So in speaking with some of these people, I'm like, I'm asking as well as like, what do you tell, how do you know this is important to your congregation? And then one of the people I spoke with was like, well, they kind of have to come out and tell you. So I thought that might be helpful for people who are kind of struggling with how to, speak to their faith leaders about this. If they don't speak to them about how they're feeling about the situation on one side or the other, then it's difficult for them to know, and it's difficult for them to, I guess, address it as a community. So, yeah, I think it's just it's good to know those things when you're reaching out to people.
Yeah, it kind of works the same way for us too, because we always look at, what's important for our community right now. And one of the best ways for us to know is by the emails that we get and by what people are telling us this is important to us right now.
Yeah, and that's kind of how this started in the first place too. I mean, I had been following the situation. I had seen stories in Minnesota itself about, people helping out and this kind of mutual aid system that's being set up there. And it was like, okay, I wonder how it's happening here. But until you start hearing from people, then you don't. It's a better way to go into the story than to kind of initiate it yourself, I think, in
Hmm.
some ways, because that shows people are, definitely interested or definitely concerned about something.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on the article itself or on the reporting process?
No, I think we'll keep following the situation, I hope, and just kind of go from here. It seems like it's changing on a daily and minute by minute basis. So we'll just keep our eyes on the situation.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that article again was headlined Minnesota Immigration Crackdowns Loom Large for Some North Dakotans. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halvorson. This has been The Backstory.